Next this evening, the shocking reality of sexism within some Muslim communities has been revealed in a new report. A study into the lives of female Muslim offenders in Yorkshire found that many are treated very differently to men once they leave prison.
The research carried out at 2 Yorkshire women's prisons reveals many Muslim women are disowned by their families, shunned by their communities, and some have had their lives threatened. Our reporter Gagan Sabaral has been speaking to some of these women. Actors have been used to protect their identities.
I was threatened with honour killing by my family, who rather wanted me dead. They didn't want their daughter, sister, niece to be in prison. I remember my brother parked outside my house with a knife in his hand wanting to kill me. I was disowned for a whole year.
Aisha left prison last year after serving 2.5 years in Askham Grange prison for possession of drugs.
I've served my sentence on my own. I've cried myself to sleep every night when I was in prison. I did everything on my own. Do I really need to be penalised again by my community?
Aisha was one of just 4 Muslim women in the prison at that time, but she's not alone. Zara spent 15 months in jail and had a similar experience.
I didn't receive a lot of support from my family. I had very few family visits during my time in prison, to be honest. It was like a punishment on top of a punishment. On the one hand, I was in prison, and then on the other hand, I wasn't getting any support from my family because I was in prison.
Zara and Aisha were both a part of a project which looked at the treatment of Muslim women prisoners. It found the way men and women were treated by their communities were very different.
In the Muslim community, family honour is very important. That honour is carried by the woman, and as the study has found out, if the woman is sent to prison, it brings shame on the family, and that doesn't end even once the sentence has been served.
They're really unforgiving, especially if you're a girl. You know, if you're a boy, it's okay.
If I was a man, I know I would have been treated differently. My release would have been celebrated by the community. I don't know why.
As well as highlighting these issues, the project also supported and advised the women and the prison.
We feel it's important to know and understand more about communities, but also offenders who come from those communities. Without that knowledge, we won't be able to resolve any issues, we won't be able to break down any barriers, and we'll find it even more difficult to actually encourage rehabilitation.
The project is now being rolled out across other women's prisons. Gagan Sabrawal, BBC Look North.
Well, joining us now are Sofia Buncy and Sarah Divan, who are both involved in the Muslim Women in Prison project. Sofia, how differently are Muslim women treated to women from any other background when they're released from prison? Depending on the crime, surely many women would be shunned.
I think prisoners are not a sympathetic topic for anybody, really. Once you look at it, as communities, we can be quite unforgiving at times. For Muslim women, there's the additional stigma when they're released that they've shamed and dishonoured their communities. So going back to families and communities can be quite difficult.
And how do you change that cultural difference?
I think it's researching and leading on research. So the research that we've done, it's commissioned by a charity called Muslim Hands. So it was led by a Muslim charity. It was community providers that actually took forward the research. And so there wasn't really that stigma that outside communities are pointing fingers at this community saying that Muslim women are shunned. It was research we carried out ourselves, recommendations we made ourselves, and people took that on board, and it was an honest review of what was happening.
So, would you say that most Muslim women in prison find that families do in fact cut them off?
Yes, you do. It's very, very common, in fact. And one of the services we provide is a befriending service and a lending ear. So when we do go in and do our drop-ins, we do pick up those women who are feeling very isolated and very alone, and you know, give them a bit of a morale boost and, you know, get them to cope with coming to terms with doing their sentence, as well as the distance being away from their family as well.
And do you manage to get families to actually change their mind and go in and see the Muslim woman who was in prison?
We do a lot of work with families, but ultimately it is down to the offender as well. You know, if she still wants to keep contact with the family, and also whether the family still wants to keep contact with them.
So it works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, sometimes the offender is quite happy to strike out on her own and you know, move away from her family, and likewise, you know, the family are quite happy for her to do that.
You said that this has been commissioned by the Muslim community to look into this issue. You, as Muslim women, have you faced any backlash for wanting to help these ladies in prison?
I think it's not really the career of choice for a Muslim woman to go and work in a prison. So there were some initial questions from our families, there were questions from communities, and we've quietly been beavering away on this topic for probably 3 years now, and we were wanting to keep the credibility of the community and just give the cause the justice that it deserves, and not really demonise anybody, not demonise the prison service, the families or the communities, but really help these women to move on. So we've had those challenges, but obviously we've also had recognition, which has helped to counter those. And
that recognition, you received an award last week, didn't you,
yes,
from St James's Palace, and the community must have been very proud of that.
Really, yeah. So it was nice to have an accolade at that level, to be honoured by Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, and it just shows that the community can lead on good practice. We can come up with good practice, recognise our own needs and move that forward.
Sarah, Sophia, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.